All right, let's just get right to it. Could you kill someone? I know, it's a super uncomfortable question. But what science tells us is that the answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's way more complicated. So today, we're going to dissect the anatomy of lethality. We're going to look at the biological hardware and the social software that basically governs our capacity for violence.
So here's the big question we're trying to answer. Is our ability to kill like a mistake, a bug in our psychological programming? Or is it a dormant feature, something that's baked into all of us, just waiting for the right, or maybe the wrong, switch to get flipped? To even begin to answer that, we've got to wrap our heads around something called the primate paradox. Because, let's be honest, we humans are a species of, well, pretty profound and often violent contradictions.
Okay, so check this out. It's called the goodness paradox, and it's a wild one. On one side, we are just uniquely cooperative. I mean, think about it. You can cram yourself onto a packed subway with hundreds of strangers, and nothing happens. No bloody fight breaks out. For our closest relatives, chimps, that would be absolute chaos. But then, there's the other side. We are also uniquely destructive. We're the only species that can sit down and plan the systematic annihilation of our own kind. So, how can we possibly be both of those things at the same time? Well, the key seems to be in understanding that there are two totally different flavors of aggression. First, you've got hot, reactive aggression, that impulsive, emotional lashing out. Think of a bar fight. But then there's cold, proactive aggression. This is planned, deliberate violence, an ambush, a war. And here's what's so fascinating. Over thousands of years, we've actually evolved to have less of that hot, impulsive aggression. It's what lets us live in cities. But, and this is a big but, we've kept our massive capacity for cold, calculated group violence. So, what does this look like inside your actual brain? I mean, what's the biological hardware controlling all this? Well, you can think of it like a constant battle inside your head, between an accelerator and a brake pedal. The accelerator, that's your amygdala. Think of it like your brain's super-sensitive smoke detector. It is unbelievably fast. It's reacting to a potential threat before you, your conscious mind, even know what you're looking at. It's built for survival, right? But in our world today, that speed can lead to some really disastrous mistakes. And then you've got the brake pedal. That's your prefrontal cortex. It's the part of your brain right behind your forehead. And it's in charge of all the grown-up stuff, rational thought, planning, and impulse control. So it gets that screaming alarm signal from the amygdala, and it basically says, whoa, hang on a second. Is this threat actually real? Is flooring the gas pedal with a violent response a good idea right now? Now, this whole balance between the gas and the brake, it's super delicate, and it can be totally thrown off by your brain chemistry. For instance, low serotonin, that can weaken the brake pedal, the prefrontal cortex. Testosterone, it doesn't just cause aggression, but it cranks up the volume on whatever you need to do to maintain your status. And get this, oxytocin, the love hormone, yeah, it makes you bond with your us, your in-group, but it can also make you way more aggressive toward them. Okay, so that's the hardware, the biology. But what happens when our social software, group dynamics, decides to grab the steering wheel? Well, this is where things start to get really, really disturbing. 65%. Just look at that number. What on earth could that possibly represent? That number, that's the percentage of totally ordinary people, back in a famous experiment in 1961, who were willing to deliver a lethal 450-volt electric shock to a complete stranger. And why? They did it just because some guy in a lab coat stood next to them and calmly said, "The experiment requires that you continue." The psychologist behind this, Stanley Milgram, he stumbled onto this terrifyingly powerful mechanism. He called it the agentic state. It's this mental flip where you stop seeing yourself as responsible for what you're doing. Instead, you just become an instrument, an agent, just carrying out orders for someone else. Your own personal morality, it just gets switched off. And look, this isn't just something that happens in a weird lab experiment. Let's talk about a real-world case. Reserve Police Battalion 101 during World War II. These guys weren't fanatics. They weren't hardened SS soldiers. They were just ordinary, middle-aged, working-class guys from Hamburg, dads, husbands. And in 1942, they were given an order to round up and execute 1,500 Jewish civilians. But here's the most crucial part of this whole story. Their commander, he actually gave them an out. He stood in front of them and said, "Look, if anyone doesn't feel up to this, you can step aside. No questions asked." So, how many took him up on it? Fewer than 3%. The other 97%, they did it. And not because they were bloodthirsty monsters, they did it because of conformity. They didn't want to look weak or like a coward in front of their buddies.
Their bond to the group was literally stronger than the rule against murder.
Okay, but wait, what about the other side of the coin? I'm sure you've heard this idea before, that humans are actually hardwired not to kill, that we have this deep, built-in resistance to it.
Yeah, this is a pretty popular idea, often called the Marshall/Grossman theory. The argument goes that most soldiers in World War II, maybe as few as 15%, actually fired their weapons directly at the enemy. Why? Because of this powerful innate phobia of killing another human being. The theory says that this resistance has to be systematically broken down by modern military training.
It's a nice thought, but there's a pretty big problem with this theory. For one, Marshall's data is now seen as, let's just say, highly questionable. But more importantly, the archaeology just doesn't lie. We have sites like the Talheim death pit in Germany, which is 7,000 years old. And what does it show? It shows evidence of entire communities, men, women, children, being systematically slaughtered long before any kind of modern conditioning ever existed. Organized killing, I'm afraid, is not a new invention.
So, okay, we've got these ancient brain circuits, these powerful social pressures. How does all of that play out today, in those high-stress, split-second decisions?
Well, let's look at something called the weapon bias test. Here's how it works. A face, either black or white, flashes on a screen for just a fraction of a second. It's immediately followed by an image of an object, either a gun or a harmless tool, like a wallet or a phone. And the person taking the test has to decide almost instantly whether to shoot or not shoot. The results, every time this is run, are consistent and pretty chilling. People are significantly more likely to make a mistake, to see that harmless tool as a gun after their brain has been primed with a blackface. Now, this isn't about conscious racism. This is your amygdala, your brain's smoke detector, under massive time pressure, falling back on a deeply ingrained cultural stereotype as a dangerous mental shortcut. The rational prefrontal cortex is just too slow to jump in and say, wait a minute. And even when killing is seen as justified, like in combat, the psychological price tag is just immense. There's a term for it, moral injury. And it's important to know this is different from PTSD, which is usually based on fear. Moral injury is a deep, shame-based trauma that comes from breaking your own moral code. It's your brain basically screaming at you that even if you had to kill, your identity as a good person is now fundamentally broken. So, we've looked at our brains, we've looked at our history, we've looked at the lab experiments. After all of that, what's the final verdict? Well, all the evidence seems to point to this one powerful idea from the writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He wrote, "The line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." What that means is the capacity for this kind of violence, it's not some alien thing that only belongs to monsters out there. That line, it cuts right through the middle of all of us. That potential is a universal feature of being human. And that brings us to the final, and maybe most unsettling thought. The real question we started with, it was never if you could kill, because the science is pretty clear that, yeah, you probably could. The much more important, much scarier question is this: what specific context, what combination of authority, group pressure, and fear would it take to make you do it? Our peaceful society. It's not because our biology has changed. It's because we've built these strong civilizational brakes, and we always have to remember just how fragile those brakes really are.